Well, it's another day with the BFG. Mr. Olinger here. Going to be reading another chapter for you. It's a really kind of cool, crazy chapter today. But before we get started, I got another giant joke for you. So, how do you talk to giants? You use big words. I know that one was silly. Anyway, we're going to start the chapter called The Bloodbottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbering. Who is you jabbering to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the Bloodbottler." But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie, on the tabletop, an enormous party-eaten snozcumbler, was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG, who was jabbering into. "And here, just now," he boomed. "I is jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Piz Fizzler," shouted the Bloodbottler. "Bugs Wallop," he boomed. "You is talking to a human being. That's what I is thinking." "No, no," cried the BFG. "Yes, yes," boomed the Bloodbottler. "I is guessing you has snitched away a human being and brought it back to your bug hole as a pet. So now I is winking it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. There's no one here," he stammered. Why don't you have I leave me alone?" The Bloodbottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little scum screwer," he shouted, piffling through the swish figgler. "Squimpy little bottom wart, pruny little pog swiggler. I is now going to search the promises." He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to wrinkle out that tasty little human being," he shouted. Picture. Oh. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous snozcumbler, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The Bloodbottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown. There was black hair spurting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. His hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was rounded and squishy-looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small and flat, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down over his chin. It's not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The Bloodbottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbly bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is dotty as a dog's waggler," cried the Bloodbottler. Soon the Bloodbottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break her leg. The snozcumbler, although it was thick and a permeable, was not going to hide her if the blood butler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had a large seed in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of the seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the cumber, large enough for her to crouch in as long as she rolled herself up into a little ball. She crawled into it. It was as wet and slimy of a hiding place, but what did that matter if she was going to save her from being eaten? The blood butler and the BFG were coming back toward the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood butler grabbed the half-eaten cumber, and the BFG stared at the bare table. Sophie, where is you? He thought desperately. You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table. So where is you hiding, Sophie? So this is the filthy, rotsome garbage you is eating? Boomed the blood butler, holding up the partly eaten cumber. You must be cockles as guzzling such rubbish. For a moment the blood butler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. That is the scrimdiddlyumptious snozcumber, he said. I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is if you never is trying a snozcumber, blood butler? Human beings is juicier, the blood butler said. You is taking Ramyat, the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that only if he could get the blood butler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out the cave. I is happy to let you sample it, the BFG went on, but please, when you see how truly glumptuous it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snippet for my supper. The blood butler stared suspiciously with small, piggy eyes at the snozcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chew-off end, began to tremble all over. You is not switch-finding me, is you? Said the blood butler. Never, cried the BFG passionately. Take a bite. I am positive you will be shouting out how scrumptious this Wondervig is. The BFG could see the greedy blood butler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It is not healthysome for to be eating meat all the time. Just this once, the blood butler said. I is going to taste this rotsome eats of yours, but I is warning you that if it is filthsome, I is smashing it over your sludgily little head. He picked up the snozcumber. Oh my gosh. He began raising it, its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet into the air. Sophie wanted to scream, "Don't!" But that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy siege, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly there was a crunch as the blood butler bit the huge hunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few seconds from her head. Then there was an utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. "Eek!" roared the blood butler. "Ugh, belch! Each!" And then he spat. All of the great clumps of snozcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, were shot shooting across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black coat hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. "You little swine bugler," he roared, the blood butler. "You little pig swiller. He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozcumbler over his head. The fragments of the filthy vegetables splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it, the BFG innocently rubbing at his head. Loving it, yelled the Bloodbottler. That is the most disgustorous taste that has ever clenched my teeth. You must be buggles to be swallowing such like that. Every night you could be galloping off, happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beings. Eating human beings is wrong and evil, the BFG said. It is guzzly and glumptuous, shouted the Bloodbottler. But tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swabble a few human Chile beans. Is you wishing to know why I is choosing Chile? I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very disdained. I choosing Chile, the Bloodbottler said, because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important that I have plenty of cold eats in this scuttling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beans from Chile is very chilly. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is all saying they is wanting to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school childers. The Bloodbottler said, I is very fond indeed of English school childers. They have a nice icky, booky flavor. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said. And you is insult to the giant people, shouted the Bloodbottler. If you is not fit to be a giant, you is a squeaky little squiddler. You is a pimply little pitsqueak. You is a cream puffinet. With that, the horrible blood-botting giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie, where are you? Sophie. Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I is happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what had happened. And there I was, telling him to eat the filthysome snozcumbler. Then you all the time was inside it, the BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, you poor little chidler, cried the BFG. You is all covered in snozcumbler and the giant spit. He set about cleaning her up as best he could. I is hating those giants more than I ever now, he said. You know what I should like? What? Sophie said. I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one. I'd be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me see if I can think of a way of doing it. Here she is, getting all cleaned up. All right, and that's the end of that chapter. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with. Sounds like Sophie just barely made it out alive, so glad that happened. Anyway, I hope you guys had a great day today, and we will see you tomorrow with the next chapter.